My name is Noemie and I am a correspondent for The Forge. This is the Notable Leftists and Revolutionaries series. Today I will be talking about Kwame Ture, also known as Stokely Carmichael. So Kwame Ture was born in 1941. He's 1 year younger than Francis Beale, so that means that they could very well have been they could have known each other very well, and they were both in the same organizations. In this year, in 1941, when he was born, National Socialist Germany, also known as Nazi Germany, attacked the Soviet Union, and they continued occupations throughout Europe. 1941 is also the year of the Pearl Harbor attack, so this is the world that Kwame Ture was born into. He passed in 1988 in Guinea, where he had fled COINTELPRO persecution, and he died of natural causes of prostate cancer. So 1998, the year that Kwame Ture passed, that's the year that gave us Google, and the Bill Clinton scandal was also that year. The USA also had a budget surplus that year. So Kwame Ture was in several organizations, including the Students' Nonviolence Coordination Committee. He was one of the original members. He was also in leadership in the Black Panther Party around 1968. And then he went on to be in the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. Stokely Carmichael was part of one of the big pushes to get Black voters to vote for Black liberation people in office, and you can see behind me, this is one of the posters used at that time. I also have the shirts here. Kwame Ture was arrested a lot, and so I think that he is maybe the reason why people see being arrested a lot as a sign of being like radical and on, making the right moves. Since he was a student organizer, he's probably the reason why a lot of people today think that being a student organizer is very radical. It was when he was alive, or when he was organizing. We're going to move on to a quote. This is one that you've probably seen if you're on Facebook and you follow Black liberation pages. It is as follows. Dr. King's policy was that nonviolence would achieve the gains for Black people in the United States. His major assumption was that if you are nonviolent, if you suffer, your opponents will see your suffering and will be moved to change his heart. That's very good. He only made one fallacious assumption. In order for nonviolence to work, your opponents must have a conscience. The United States has none. So here we see an example of Kwame Ture pushing for an end to nonviolent protest. He wants armed struggle, which is the type of struggle that you hear about in places like Burkina Faso or in the Philippine Islands, involving guns and artillery. He's pushing for more of that. Okay, so this next quote is a little bit long, but it's worth it. If you see an African in Europe, you do not say he is an African. If you see him in America, you do not call him an African. He may be Negro, he may be West Indian, he may be everything else but African. That is because Europe took its time to divide us carefully, quite carefully, and they give us different names so that we would never, always never, refer to ourselves by the same name, which helped ensure that there would always be differences. If you say you are West Indian, it is fairly obvious that you are something different to be set apart from an African. An American Negro and an African are obviously not the same thing. One of the most important things we must now begin to do is to call ourselves African. No matter where we may be from, we are first of all and finally Africans. Africans, Africans, Africans. Okay, so this next quote is related to this one. Another quote from Kwame Ture: "The colonized fight beyond economic security, far beyond." And so it seems to me that as we begin the search for allies and coalitions, we can only form allies and coalitions based on whether those people are fighting for the same thing, fighting the same fight that we who have been colonized are fighting. In other words, people who are fighting for their humanity. This means, for example, that all non-white peoples who have been colonized can join hands, understanding, of course, that our fights remain entirely different. So I think that this is really, really important because of the rise of a strange brand of ethno-nationalism here in the United States of America. We should listen to what established revolutionaries have to say about making allies and the requirements of such, and how to handle all of that. So let's move on to some criticisms of Kwame Ture, some common criticisms and some of my own. Francis M. Beale was in the same organization as Kwame Ture, Students Nonviolence Coordinating Committee. Francis Beale left to form the Third World Women's Alliance. She didn't want anything to do with the Black Panther Party anymore, the SNCC, because of sexism within that organization. And when we are in the age of 2019 and we're talking about believing women, believing Black women, we should really take seriously the fact that a whole section of the SNCC and BPP left to make the Third World Women's Alliance, and they were primarily made up of Black women. I also want to say, as far as Kwame Ture's views about women and women's liberation, we can't really chalk up his views to the time. He had access to contemporaries like Francis Beale. They were only 1 year apart in age. They were in the same organization, and you know, there were other Black women as well who had very forward and empowered and informed views about their role in liberation. And I'd also like to comment that anyone who says that talking about sexism within Black liberation spaces is divisive, I would like you to remember that the major split that happened in the 1970s was that women left sexist spaces where people would not make changes to their sexist behavior. So it wasn't the women who divided things, it was the people who refused to include the women in meaningful roles. So these kinds of issues that happened in Kwame Ture's time and in our time, you know, these kinds of issues don't have to happen, but the problem doesn't get solved by refusing to talk about gender liberation in favor of Black liberation. Both of them intertwine, they're intersecting, they're the same thing within a lot of our bodies, including mine, being an AFAB person, not a woman, but I do experience misogyny. Now let's talk about why Kwame Ture is popular. I am a fan of a lot of his theory. You know, he's consistently in leadership, so a lot of people know him from that. He was the honorary prime minister in the Black Panther Party and a leader of the All-African People's Revolutionary Party. Kwame Ture was one of the original freedom riders, and he was a voting rights activist when billboards and polling places had to be guarded by armed guards because of intimidation directed at Black voters. He is an example also of what happens when people are targeted by COINTELPRO. Much of his theory was correct and dangerous, besides the stuff relating to gender. And so to end this, he's also an example of how we must approach Black women's liberation in a better way in particular, and what happens when we ignore it. So thanks for watching, and my name is Noemie. This has been a notable Leftists and Revolutionaries video for The Forge. Tune in for more. Bye!